In a world overflowing with distractions, we seek meaning. How do we transform ambition into something deeper, into true fulfillment? I'm Sam Pepin, CEO of Course-Educa, and I've spent years helping businesses succeed by connecting their goals to something bigger. On the Meaningful podcast, we explore not just how to win in business, but how to grow as individuals. Through conversation with thought leaders, innovators, and everyday heroes, we uncover the stories that drive us towards something greater. Whether you're striving for success, seeking purpose, or just looking for the next steps in your journey, this podcast is your guide to navigating the intersection of ambition, growth, and meaning. So please join me and our incredible guests as we redefine what's possible in both business and life. Enjoy. Great leadership isn't about power. It's about empowering others to succeed. Welcome to the Meaningful Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Pepin, and today we're exploring three powerful themes: building leadership legacies, transforming company culture, and the future of organizational success. Our guest today is Tom Kereszti, an accomplished CEO, international business leader, and author of C-Suite and Beyond. With experience leading global acquisitions, restructuring non-profitable companies, and managing billion-dollar mergers, Tom has mastered the art of leadership across cultures. His passion lies in mentoring the next generation of executives, fostering self-led teams, and integrating AI-driven insights to enhance company culture. From his lessons in cross-cultural leaderships to his strategy for developing high-performance teams, Tom's insights will inspire you to lead with purpose and drive meaningful change in your organization. If you enjoyed this discussion, please let the world know with a like, a small review, or even a quick share. Your support helps more people find meaningful content just like this. Let's begin. Mr. Tom Kereszti, welcome on the Meaningful Podcast. How are you doing?
Doing great. How about you?
Doing fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. It's actually my first time meeting you, and what you're doing in culture and leaderships is it's quite inspiring. So I'm looking forward to great conversations. To start us off, I'd love if you can introduce yourself with Culture Force.
So I like to introduce myself as a father of three. I don't want my legacy to be Culture Force. I want my legacy to be what my kids accomplish in life, and they're doing pretty damn well right now. So that's good for them. And then Culture Force specifically, deals with organizations and, how people behave, how people interact, how people go about their day. That's what really culture is. It's a DNA of an organization. So we try to, find companies that don't have a good DNA or don't like their DNA and want to make it better. That's what Culture Force is all about.
Interesting. And you begin obviously in leaderships quite a long time ago, obviously as a seasoned professional. You had early roles with giants like Colgate and Palmolive as well. I'm thinking, when you're thinking about how that shapes your early experience shape basically your leadership styles and your approach to leaderships, take us back to that time and how it was to work with different cultures and perhaps refine your perspective through it.
Well, it's a journey that you go through, right? I mean, my first job with Colgate-Palmolive, I was a shift supervisor on a factory floor, right? So, the leadership skills you have to employ as a college graduate, basically, with people who are in the union for 20 or 30 years, and they're very structured and very set in their own ways. Those leadership skills that you learn at that part of your life is very different than the leadership skills you need as a CEO of a $400 million company where, the people you're leading are smart, PhDs, MBAs, and et cetera. So they're a little bit different skills, but you can't forget the lessons you learn on the factory floor, because the fact is, I think, personally, culture and leadership boils down to who you are as an individual, right? We relate to each other as human beings. So if I was a cocky college kid, on the factory floor, trying to deal with, people who have been in a union doing the same job for 20, 25 years, then they would have said, who the hell is this kid? We're not going to listen to them. So I had to earn their respect. And the way I earned their respect was really through my actions. So for example, I get it as the union. So everybody has their job classifications and stuff. Well, this one guy really pissed me off because didn't seem fair. His job was to basically bring all the supplies to production lines and make sure all the production lines were functioning well and they were well stocked. Now, that took him about 45 minutes to an hour on an 8-hour shift. And then he would go sleep for 7 hours while the rest of the guys kind of all worked. Now, everybody was kind of doing the job, but it just annoyed the hell out of me that this one guy is sleeping for 7 hours and everybody else is working. So I looked in the rule book and basically the rule book said, well, as a supervisor of the production line, I have the authority to give him tasks. So I gave him cleanup tasks. I just want to make sure he's doing something, not sleeping for 7 hours, because I just didn't think it was fair for the other guys. Mm-hmm. And, he complained to the union and everything else, but, I earned the respect of the other guys on that shift because they also didn't like it. I mean, why do they have to work 8 hours a day and the other guys sleep for 7, right? I was just fair with people. I was real with people. If they needed help, I was out there. I wasn't sitting in my little, production booth for 8 hours a day. I was out there in the production floor helping them, talking to them. And sometimes I was in the midnight shift, right? So from midnight to 8 in the morning. So it's just really gaining people's respect, and then showing them the way. And that's not really different than when I was a CEO of a $400 million company. I still had to earn the respect of my general managers. I still have to earn my respect of my vice presidents, as a human being of the way I acted, the things that I did.
Interesting. And when you're thinking about just how diverse basically that those environments are, were you always somebody that pick up on those things easily to just basically mold yourself or perhaps mold your environments to those around you so that they can also understand what you want from them? Because that's also very important, obviously, as a leader. Our objective should always be to inspire, to have other people that we lead not only listen to us, but also actively pursuing what we think as a supervisors or somebody basically up the food chain, as we like to say, are trying to accomplish. Was that always simple for you, or how were you able to mold yourself towards different environment like those?
Got me.
Oh, interesting. Might be is your connection strong?
Yeah. Just, all of a sudden it disconnected, right? So it disconnected from the studio and then it closed my windows. So I don't know what the heck happened.
Okay. We'll edit that part out and start back from I already have my question in my mind. That's fine.
Everything went on. I said, what happened?
That's okay. That's okay. And so I was wondering, Tom, obviously you're talking about earning respect and you were able to do so in diverse environments as well. Was that something that you pick up quite quickly about not only what you want basically others to do as a supervisors, but how to do so that people follows you and earn that respect basically quite effectively?
Well, look, it's just the way I'm wired, right? Some people are wired as self-centered. Just recently, right? I won't name the individual, but he's the head pastor of the church I go to, or the church I went to, and I always felt as a leader, it's my responsibility to walk into a room and get to know the people in the room. Who's in the room, what are you about, so I am reaching out before I make a presentation, before I get on stage. I work the room to find out who's in the room, so I understand who they are, maybe what they're thinking. This particular guy, he's expecting everybody else to get to know him, right? So, I was at a meeting one time and I finally walked up to this guy. I said, look, Pastor, whatever his name is, and I know his name, I just don't want to, mention it here. I said, look, you and I have been in a room for at least a dozen times and you still have no idea who I am. So I'm Tom. So next time you're in a room, you know who I am, right? Because in that particular situation, he's the leader. And in my opinion, he should do that. Another example, I'm working with this, home improvement company. So they invite me to their sales meeting and here's the owner of the company. And the owner of the company is handing out envelopes with cash bonuses to some of the sales guys. And written on the envelope, and by the way, this is not a big company. It's not like a Fortune 500 company with, thousands of employees. they have about 25, 30 guys on the sales force, and it's privately owned by one guy. So he's looking at the names on the envelopes before he's ready to hand out, and he has no idea who these people are. I'm like, you're the owner of the company. There's about 25 people in the sales team, and you don't know who they are. And granted, you don't know who they are, but at minimum, when you get to the meeting, you look at the names on the envelopes while you're in that room, and you go shake their hands to know a little bit, at least to know what they look like, or ask your sales manager, which guy is John and which guy is Peter. I mean, it just like blew my mind
Right.
how self-centered people are. And that's just not the way I'm wired. That's not my DNA. So,
Have you find that a recurring problem, this with the people you work with across your career, this perhaps lack of communication to certain points where it's so performance and result driven that everything else, personality and basically everything surrounding human beings driving that vision forwards is just futile perhaps for them?
well, at least the higher you go into the food chain, I call it the corporate food chain, but the higher you go up in the food chain, unfortunately, some people become more self-centered because they believe it's about them. They believe that, what they do personally, is what matters, and that's the thing that moves everything forward. So they become self-centered, they become egotistical. And unfortunately, the higher you go to the food chain, that's what happens. And that's not really real life. In real life, what happens is if you build a good team and you empower that team and you delegate to that team, they'll take care of things themselves and they'll solve problems themselves. Just a little plug for Culture Force. I mean, that's really what we do is we enable self-led teams throughout an organization to become self-sufficient and to become self-led. So they're not looking for answers from the top down, right? Because the fact is, I like to quote Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett said he likes to invest in companies with great brands that any dummy can lead, because one day a dummy will, right? So that's pretty much our philosophy. We want to be able to build teams inside of an organization that will be great, highly functioning teams, regardless of who's at the top, because eventually you're going to get them all around to the top, right? But if you have great self-led teams, then they'll survive the idiocracy of whoever that leadership guy is, or, pretends to be a leader.
Right, and I love what George Bernard Shaw had to say on this, which is, the single biggest problems in communication is the illusion that it has taken place, meaning that communication is such a vital core driver of everything, not only performance, but any relationship in life. For you, and obviously driving an organization like Culture Force, what are some of the best insights that leaders can take on to better their communications and make sure that their teams basically are more equipped to be self-led in the first place?
Well, two things. If you're inside of a leadership, if you're inside of a team, you have many members in that team. And the biggest thing that has to work inside that team is trust. If people don't trust each other, then that whole thing breaks down. And the reason it breaks down is because if you're as an individual, if you don't do your part and people are relying on you to deliver something, right? And you drop the ball, maybe you can do that once. But if you did it more than once or twice, people say, well, we can't trust now, right? So trust is a really integral part of it. And one of my partners in Culture Force is a retired Navy SEAL. And, trust is one of the key cornerstones of the Navy SEALs, because they have a saying that says, trust you with my life and I trust you with my wife.
Mm.
So trust is extremely hard, because look, we're in the battlefield of business. So if the worst case happens, somebody gets fired. You're in a battlefield with the Navy SEALs. The worst case is somebody dies. I mean, the stakes are just much, much, much higher. So trust is an extreme, I would say, indicator of how well teams function. And the second one is relationships, because if you don't have a relationship with somebody, how can you trust them, right? So it's really to get to know people, to connect with people, not to communicate with people. I kind of joke. I said, look, there's three levels of what I call communication. And The first level is informing somebody. And this is probably not, it's sad, but it's probably about 95% of the presentations in conference rooms and boardrooms across, businesses all over the world. There's a guy with a PowerPoint presentation or whatever presentation, and he's just informing everybody in a room of why this project is good or why they should do this or what, but it's just kind of, vomiting all over people with information, right? And that's 95% of it. One of the times I use this funny story because, granted, this guy, Larry, he was a VP and he was just kind of traveling. So there was some time zones involved, but, he's a senior VP in the company and, they're presenting and, obviously when you're in a conference room and this presentation, the lights are dim. So there's not a light. And about 10 minutes into this guy's presentation, Larry is snoring like chainsaw, right? And everybody's like, what should we do? Should we wake up Larry? Or, it's like, the hell with Larry. He didn't put himself to sleep. The guy presenting put him to sleep. So don't worry about Larry. You worry about the guy that's presenting.
Right.
So that's the first level of communication. And we're all trained on even body language, how to stand up straight and how to use your voice and, all that stuff. But it's really just information. And then the second level of communication is actually what I call communication, where you and I are, for example, talking to each other. And we're actively listening. Like in my mind, I'm at why is Sam asking that question? Right? What's behind that question? And so you're not only using your body and your mind and everything else, but you're not thinking. You're thinking about building rapport with you. You're thinking about why is he asking a question, rather than just me answering the question, so I can go to the next thing. Just kind of forming a dialogue to say, let's explore that opportunity or let's explore that issue or whatever. So then real communication starts place. And then the highest level is connection. And connection is extremely important because that's why I say, you go from first one is information. You talk with your body and your mouth and everything else. The second is your mind. So you're exchanging ideas in your mind, which is communication. And the third was connection. You really get your heart and your soul into it. You connect. I connect with you, Sam, as a human being. It's not about what you're thinking. It's not about what you're saying, but how you're feeling or why you're feeling it that way. Why is that thing so important to you? It's a great cause that you want to, make the world a better place to be. How do I help you with that? So I get down to your soul and and I love the Irish. The first time I went to Ireland, it was so funny because, I kind of, not kind of, but I travel all over the world and I've been all over the place. And I look at different societies and different countries with different gifts and they call it the Irish gap for a reason, right? So you go to Ireland and besides all the green and everything else, which is absolutely beautiful. And I got to give a plug to Guinness because Guinness doesn't taste anywhere like in the world, like in Ireland. It just is the most delicious beer there is. But in Ireland, everybody talks to you. Like you sit at a table in a restaurant, a table next to you starts talking to you. We were actually, Kathy and I, my wife, we were taking a ferry. And we were taking a ferry over from one part or northern part of Ireland to another. And it was about 20 minutes. So there's a little coffee cart there. We're having a coffee and this guy with his dog comes by and says, "Hey guys, how you doing?" So we're waiting for the ferry. We're going to go, "Oh yeah. I grew up in this house over here. My wife was over there. And my parents, my in-laws are still living in this house. And I met my wife 25 years ago. We got two beautiful kids. My kids are over here. And, where you guys go? Oh, you're from America. Well, you got to go see this place. So he took 20 minutes out of his life just to talk to us while we're waiting for the ferry and not about how's the weather, right? But he's sharing his life, who he's married to, his kids, what he's doing in life, asking us the same thing. And it's so beautiful. It's a gift of the Irish that they engage you in discussion. They share their stories. And then in turn, you share your stories with them and you start to connect on a human level. So going all the way back to your original question about the two things of teams, one is trust and the other one's connection. And the way connection happens is, sharing your stories, getting other people to share their stories, to open up heart to heart, not just body to body, mind to mind, but heart to heart. And then you have this human connection along with having, the trust in the other individual that they will show up and they will do what they do. And then teams begin to really function very good.
Right. And I want to talk a little bit about cross-cultural leadership because you beautifully led businesses across Central America and obviously Eastern Europe. And you were just talking about the fact that you were very, very in touch and loving the islands cultures. And that's fantastic. That's a very open, very vibrant cultures. But I'm wondering, when you were obviously navigating those different cultures and how you were still able to basically unify teams and achieve business success, where the fact that basically where they were, what's their background, ethnicity, cultures, and so on. Why do you think you were able to do so? And what's basically, you would say, kind of like the point of leadership where you're able to actively get people together, regardless of perhaps their differences or what makes them basically tackling it with a different lines, perhaps, as I like to call it?
Well, two things. So the first thing is I listen. Anytime I walk into a room, I don't speak, I listen. God gave me 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. And many leaders and many people in position of leadership, they think they have to have all the answers. And they think that when they'll walk into the room, they have to own the room. And they have to show everybody how smart they are in the room. And I'm exactly the opposite. I walk into the room, I listen, I learn. So the first time I went to Brazil, how could I possibly claim what's going on in the Brazil market? So, I went to Brazil, once, 1 week, out of a month, every month when we bought that business to learn about it. Right. And I didn't just sit in a conference with the guys. We went out to the trade, we did store checks, we talked to customers. So I need to understand, before I'm making the decisions, I needed to understand from my local team how they saw the market and kind of verify, myself. So I listen a lot. And that also gives me respect, or I earn respect of that team there, because they're like, well, he's not an asshole. He's actually, listening to what we say. We actually have, a say, we have an input on what's going to happen here. So that gives a lot of, I would say, energy and satisfaction to the local team, because I'm actually listening to them. And, the second thing is, okay, make sure you have a team, and I call it diversity of thought. So when you put a team together, or even if you inherit a team, right, make sure, and I don't know whether you take DISC or Myers-Briggs or LSI or PI, it doesn't matter which test you take, but put your team through a skills assessment so you understand how they think and how they view the world. One of the problems with leadership is people tend to surround themselves with like-minded individuals, because it feels good. We all kind of get along, we all think alike. And before I learned this skill set about 30, 40 years ago, my approach was, man, this guy's a total idiot. I mean, they're just a freaking loser. They don't do anything. All they do is procrastinate. And then later on in life, I learned that this is not about procrastination. They're just analytical mindsets, right? They're highly analytical. They want to analyze data, and they do have difficulty making decisions. So on the flip side of that, if you put a room full of analytical people together, they will never make a decision, because they will never have enough data. They'll just analyze, and no decision will come out of it. That actually happened with a bank I was consulting with. They brought me in for a strategic, they wanted me to help with their strategy. And then after about a couple of hours, I went to the CEO of the bank. I said, look, you don't have a strategy problem. You got a people problem, because you got a bunch of, financial analysts in the room, and I don't care what strategy you're going to have. They're never going to make a decision. They're just going to analyze the shit out of everything, right? And they'll never make a decision. So getting back to the point, make sure you put a team together where you know people's strengths, and make sure it's a diverse mindset team. I talk about diversity a lot, but I'm not talking about skin color. I'm not talking about gender. I'm not talking about all that stuff. I'm talking about how you think, because look, if you want to be a diverse individual and you go DEI and you put a room, all full of, Afro-Americans there, but they all think alike, you're not diverse. All you've done is you put the same people. So now you're kind of thinking a totally different mindset, but it's not a diverse mindset, right? That's why I say diversity of thought is the most important. And what you have to do is you actually have to do it in two steps. One is to make sure that you have people who think very differently. And I don't care if it's DISC or Myers-Briggs or PI, whatever test ultimately they're going to put you into 4 quadrants. All these tests kind of name them differently, but
Right.
eventually they're in 4 quadrants of how people view the world, problem solving, etc. So what you have to do is you have to make sure that you got all these covered. And then when you have all covered, the next step is to make sure that people understand that the guy across from you is not a bad person. He's not stupid. He just sees the world different than you, right? And get him to appreciate it because, look, you're in a room with 3 other individuals. Let's just say it's, one of each, and you got a problem to solve. Now, if you're all thinking alike, you're all going to come up with the same solution because you all got the same blind spots, and it may be the wrong solution. Now, if you got 4 different people thinking with 4 different mindsets for the same problem, you're going to have 4 solutions. Isn't that a much better, because now you can have a healthy debate and you say, well, okay, I thought this was the best solution, but actually the other one is the best solution, right? Because people look at it, the problem, they analyze it differently, and you come up with 4 solutions instead of 1. Now, isn't that a better thing? So that's kind of, listen, getting back to the original question is the first thing is really force yourself to listen, force yourself to understand before you speak, right? And then once you understand, then you can add value to the equation, and then make sure that you have a really diverse thinking team. And then I think you have the foundational elements of going forward.
Yeah, it's because you have a proven record, obviously, of turning and restructuring perhaps non-profitable companies into one that are profitables, and you seem to truly focus from my research on crisis management and strategic alignment. You were utilizing this example with the bank, which I think was very interesting, where you came back to the decision makers and you said, well, the strategy might be fine, but the people executing it there's just no chance. Basically, it can be the right people to do so. Is that what you typically find with non-profitable business, where the strategy basically might be viable to a certain extent, consciously thought for, by the way, but not executed in a way in which mid to long term is sustainable? Is that typically the biggest gaps, or tell me what you typically found as the main problems of non-profitable business these days?
Well, I found and look, there's no right or wrong answers. I'm not the smartest person in the room always. But all I can talk to you about is my story, my experiences. And,
Sure.
I've had some success and I also had some failures. And that's how I came up with my book, C-Suite and Beyond. And I call it the 4 Keys of Leadership Success. And what I found in my life, and that's how I started writing this book, is when I looked at my life and reflected on it, I said, look, what was happening when things were working well? And what was happening when things were not working well? And what I found is these 4 things. And the first one, I talk about culture, or in the case of an individual, it's the character. The second one is vision. The third one is strategy, not a strategy, a strategy, which is a growth strategy. And then the fourth one is the team, your inner circle. So when I looked at all those things, I said, if you have a check mark in all 4 of these, and all 4 of these are fine, you're going to be successful. If one or more of those missing, that's when I looked at my life. I said, okay, well, things are not working. Like, for example, I left my, I would say W-2 back in 2005. So 2005, I left corporations. I started my first business. And I thought I was a superstar, so I tried to do a little of my own. So if I look at, how could I have done much better for my first business? Well, if I looked at my inner circle was me, right? It was my own business. It was my own start business. I hired people, but my inner circle was, I had a good team, but my inner circle was me. Said, well, I could have done much better if it wasn't just about me, if I had some business partners. So then my second business, I had 2 business partners, and that business failed miserably. And the reason it failed miserably because the 2 business partners that I teamed up with It just didn't work. Right. So, the lesson there was, okay, well, I like the idea of business partners versus just myself, but I chose the wrong people. Right.
Right.
So that was just two quick examples on, what happens when the team's not working right or your inner circle is not working right. Right. Also, if you have a disconnect between vision and strategy, things are not working right. Like, I always use Kodak. Kodak is a great example. They had a great vision. If, back in my Colgate days, we actually had a partnership with Kodak, about the most beautiful smile in the world. We had a joint promo to say, okay, well, Colgate is about teeth and Kodak is about photographs. So send us the most beautiful smile. So we got all these pictures from all over the world about people smiling. It was a contest. It was a promotion, right? And Kodak at that time, their vision was to be the best imaging company in the world, right? So it's a great vision, and they were a great company. All of a sudden, that best imaging world became a film manufacturer. And then when digital cameras came along, there was no more film. Then it was basically copying and paper, and so they just lost their way because they didn't hold true to their vision. Had true to their vision and embrace digital technology and not worry about digital technology as, oh, it was just different technology. That's not us. We're in filmmaking. Film will never go away, and all of a sudden the whole world changed and it's all digital, and, a 35 millimeter film is a novelty now, right? Just because they forgot what their vision was. And they're pretty much, they're still in business, but they're a fraction of what they were at one time or what they could be. So, you gotta, stay true to your vision. So again, the first one, we talked a lot about already, culture, or individual's character. The second one's vision. Third one is the strategy, and it's a growth strategy because we don't want to be fatter. We don't want to be more out of shape. We don't want to be poorer. So you always want to be growing as an individual, growing as a company. And again, you're in a circle. So those are the kind of four things, that I think is key, to really lead a healthy life and a healthy company. It's just my story. I'm sure there's other stories out there.
Beautiful. And I was able to preview that book. I want to touch on it a little bit. It seems to me like there was, truly you wanted, at least, or that's what I pick up as a young leader myself, as serving as a guide for young leaders that are aspiring basically to reach executive roles. Was that the audience you were trying to reach out to, and perhaps was that the intentions behind the writing itself? Tell me more about when you were doing a book. Was that the vision?
Exactly. The way the book happened, it was born was, my wife is very entertaining. We're expats living all over the world, and, she has all these, millions of stories, and, she's just outspoken. I mean, if we're at a dinner party, she's always dominating the conversation and talking about this story, and people are just like very entertained, amused by her stories. She's very graphic. And then, somebody said, well, you guys should write a book. So I knew my wife wasn't going to write a book because she's very entertaining, but she's not a writer, right? So I said, okay, well, let me figure out how I would write a book about all these stories, right? So I kind of gathered all these stories and I started putting them together, and I said, okay, well, who the heck would want to actually listen to all these stories? I mean, it doesn't make sense. They're all over the place. And then when I started putting the puzzle together, I said, well, shit, like these stories, I was, doing pretty well in life, and these stories, my life was a mess, and, these stories, blah, blah, blah. So I said, okay, it starts making sense. These are the keys to leadership success. And these are the stories that illustrate how I was successful in building a vision, or how I failed in putting a team together, et cetera. So just a life full of stories of failure and success, where I got things right, illustrated by those four keys. And so it's a pretty easy read. It's just a bunch of fun stories and a couple of key points about, what led to my leadership success or leadership failure. And that's how the book came apart, how the book came together. And it's really and by the way, when I was 20 years old or 22 years old, when I was starting out in work, if somebody came up to me and said, Tom, let me ask you a question. Do you have a vision for your life? I would have said, what the hell are you talking about? I'm 22. I just got out of college, I got a little convertible car. What do you mean vision for my life? And nobody asked me that question. And I wish somebody did, because I think maybe I would have approached life a little bit different. And, so that's also part of the book is to have somebody who's younger to pick it up, to read it, and to ask some questions in their lives to say, what am I doing? Am I doing the right thing?
Yes, and you're talking a lot about pattern recognition, but then also pattern duplications, right? So those are the keys. There's some stories to illustrate basically those keys and to validate, perhaps justify why I'm saying what I'm saying. But then duplicating basically those patterns, you can stay on not only on top but on path for that vision to unfold is also extremely important. It's interesting you mentioned if somebody would ask you this question when you were younger, that might have of changed the way you were operating, or I suppose living in the first place. How important are mentors? Would you say you're not at an age where you're able to mentor a lot of people yourself, but would you say that should be an intrinsic portions of each basically ambitious people's journeys and lives is to find great mentors, or at least seek to perhaps wisdom from others?
Well, I mentioned to you earlier, the first thing I do when I walk into a new room is listen, right? And
Right.
I think that's very important for anybody to recognize that they don't have all the answers. So look, I'm in the latter parts of my life. I don't know how many more years I got left, but hopefully a few more. But I learn from everybody. I don't care. I don't learn from you because you're wiser and older. I learn from you because you did something in life or you experienced something in life that I can learn from. Right. Sam, I don't know how old you are. I'm guessing you're about probably half my age or even less. Right. But that doesn't mean I can't learn from you. Right. You probably experienced something in life that I haven't, that I could benefit from. So I think it's just, it's a person's attitude of being open to learn from others. And it's just, it's part of being humbleness that you don't have all the answers. And it's a little bit tough because I remember myself when I was young, guy coming out of college, getting my first job and second job, and really being on that rocket ship of the corporate food chain that I was on. And it's tough to humble yourself, and life will humble you, by the way. If you don't, you don't humble yourself, life will humble you. But you
Yes.
think you have all the answers because you're the brightest individual, and why couldn't you have all the answers? Because they just gave you this promotion and they put you in charge of this new team or whatever. So you think you have all the answers, but I think if you're humbled, or you're humble enough, or life humbles you that you're forced to be humbled, then you start listening and start learning. And if you start listening and start learning, then I think you can become, somebody a much better version of yourself than if you don't listen. So I think and I kind of got lost with your original question, but, just be humble, be willing to learn. And it's just an attitude that you have. And, some people have it and some people get it by being humble.
Beautiful. You obviously, and I'm 20 years old, so I appreciate you saying such things. I don't know how old you are. I would guess that it's less than half your age. But from my perspective, also from reading your story, obviously we're part of very, very high stakes moments and high stake deals, most importantly. And obviously you directed a $1 billion merger and kind of like spearheaded this process of acquisition yourself and across a lot of constants as well, which also was quite mind blowing to me, at least. When you talk a lot about listening, which is super fantastic, and I'm sure that position you in rooms that you were only dreaming of when you were kind of like on the rocket ship of the corporate ladder. But when it comes to those high pressure moments of those major mergers and major acquisitions, what do you think is the differentiators from those that have what I call having the shoulders to handle that pressure, and those that typically simply do not have it? When I'm talking about that 0.001%, what makes them different, and how were you able to reach that status alongside your career?
I'm going to say something very simple. It's your values, right? Whatever values you have, and values are kind of funny, because I am of the opinion that you don't learn values when you become an adult. You learn your values when you're a kid. When you're not even a teenager, but 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. That's when you learn your values, that stay with you for the rest of your life. And I would contend that people that quote unquote learn values when they're 30, 40, 50 years old, really learning those values. They're just maybe habits, that they exercise habits, and then what happens is, values are really true values when they're tested under pressure, right? It's really easy to display values when there's no pressure. And that's why I call them, sort of habits, that things that you learn when you're 30 or 40. But if those values are ingrained in you, when pressure strikes you, that's the only thing that you have to fall back on, because they're part of your DNA. They're ingrained with you. So when shit happens and chaos is all over the place, if your values are strong, they'll get you through that. If your values are just habits and not values, then you'll crumble. So in all those high pressure situations, you're in a room, you kind of go back to those values. So let's assume, let's not assume, but it happened many times. I'm in a room with some very high flying individuals, where we're trying to make an acquisition or do a merger, right? So what's my first instance? My first instance is to add value to the situation and start listening, right? So I don't try to come into the room and bulldoze. I come into the room and observe. Put myself in the other side's shoes. What's in it for them? Why are they trying to do this merger? Why are they open to being acquired, right? How do they benefit? So how do I add value to that equation to see what makes the other side win, right? So most people walk into a situation and say, I want to buy this company. I want 100%. I want it tomorrow, and I want it for the cheaper price. So that's my objective. Right? I walk into a room and say, what does the other guy want? What's going to make them click when they pick me to acquire them versus one of my competitors to acquire? And by the way, this is something I can talk about it because it happened many, many years ago. But when I was working for the Strauss family, and we had a strategy of consolidating roasters all over the world, right? It was if you looked at the coffee market, it was pretty consolidated. In the U.S., you had, not in the U.S., but globally, you had Nestle, you had Kraft, and you had Sara Lee at the time. Sara Lee is no more, but at the time you had Sara Lee. Right, those were the big three you found all over the place. And then you had the specialty, what I call the Italians. You had the Lavazza, the Segafredos. And then in Europe, you also had a fairly large player called Cibo. But anywhere else in the world, where you looked at Brazil, you look at Africa, you look at, not just Brazil, but Latin America, you had small roasters all over the place. And they all tend to be not public companies, but they were all family companies that, grew throughout the years. So what happens? Kraft goes into a meeting and said, hey, we want to buy you. And we want to start at 51% minimum. Right? We won't take anything less than 51, but the starting discussion is 51. We'd love to get 100, but if you don't want to sell a small company, minimum is 51. And within 5 years, there's automatic triggers that gets us to 100. Right? So what is that signal to the owner who spent his 20 years, 25 years, maybe second, from day one, I'm out because you got 51% of the company. So that was slightly different discussion, because we said, look, you know what? We can't take 49, but we'll take 50. We'll be equal partners. So you have 50, we have 50. And in fact, instead of selling your company now for $50 million, you'll benefit from just selling half of that $50 million to us and then participating in the growth of the value we bring to the equation. So when you sell the 100%, whatever you want. And if you don't want to sell it, you want to give it to your kids, it's okay, right? We only have one stipulation. We run the books, right? So we always put the CFO into the organization. Well, we said, look, you're pretty good. The reason we want to buy your company because you built a pretty good brand and you got great customers. So why in God's name would I want to shove you out and put my own people in there? I want you to stay along for the ride because you're a pretty smart individual. You got the business this far. And now all you want to do is you want to bring expertise in. into how to manage a larger business better, how to grow the business better. But we still want you to be part of that growth. And whenever you're ready to cash out, you'll cash out at a much higher multiple because you participated and at least have the business growing. Without failure, every one of those guys sold us 100% within 5 years, right? And we didn't have to force them, right? So that's why we were able to make acquisitions in those emerging markets that big guys like, 20, 30, 40, 50 times the size of us couldn't make those same acquisitions because they were like just bulldozers. Right? So we just kind of put ourselves, and I put myself in the other guy's shoe. I said, what's he want? Well, let's give him recognition, or let's give them recognition and their families for the recognition of all the blood, sweat, and tears that they did. Let's just not say, hey, you're not important. You're a bunch of idiots. No, you are very important. You're not a bunch of idiots. And we want you to participate and we want you to benefit. And that's how we were able to do all those acquisitions.
So that's how you approach complexity, right? Through your values and ensuring a seamless integration and value creation on both sides.
That part of their DNA says, we are people of value who value people, who add value to people. So what does that mean? Well, we people of value, I mean, you got to value yourself. You got to say, I got something to bring to the table. I know something, I have some skill sets, so I value myself because I'm a very important piece of the puzzle. And I value you, right? I value the other individual, because if I don't value you, if I don't value your contributions, if I don't value who, then it's all about me. It's not about us. And then that's the really only way I can add value to you is if I value you as an individual and value myself. And that's just not personal, but that also goes for culture. That also goes for organizations. I value my organization because my organization is really good at X, Y, and Z, right? So I'm a consultant. I'm really good at culture. My organization, my company, Culture Force, who are really good at building cultures inside of organizations. I value you, or I value your company because it's important. Right? You may be making a difference in the world. You may be making widgets, or you may be making, clean waters for African kids so they can have clean water. So I value what you do. I value your organization. And then I can add value to you, right? So whether that's for an individual or whether that's for organizations, that formula works.
Right. And you talk about this at Lying, but obviously part of team building is understanding that the strength of each and the talent of each makes us the team, right? The team members. And from that, basically we're stronger as a collective than only basically pieces and individuals outside of that team. When you're thinking about not only the team building aspect, which you talk at length about, but how you were able to identify and nurture basically talent to create these teams in the first place, especially for those bigger companies the people that were joining you on those high stake decisions. How are you able to? Were you the one in charge basically of creating these teams in the first place? And if that was the case, how can leaders and people basically right now trying to build world class teams can better shape and mold themselves this understanding of diversity of mindset, as you like to say, which I really love, which I will definitely steal, by the way. So thank you, Tom. Because I think it's fantastic, DEI of mindsets. But on a more serious note, how are you able to identify and nurturing the person that we talked about was identifying the first place what's necessary for XYZ job at XYZ role.
So picture this. In an expat world, they basically pick you to go solve a problem and stick you into a company somewhere, across the world, right? So, whether it was Colgate-Palmolive or Reckitt Benckiser or Strauss or Philips Electronics, they would say, okay, well, Tommy's our guy, so we're going to send him to, Mexico, or send him to London, or send him to wherever, because there's a company that's not being profitable. That's what you send you there, because maybe the company's not growing as fast as it could, was the general manager. So you go in there, they're going to write you up and say, hey, Tom, did this and this and this, and he's coming to be your new boss. So he's a great guy, be nice to him. So, but eventually you end up in a company where the company's there and you're the new guy, right? You're the new person walking in, has to figure out what the heck is going on and how do I fix it? And by the way, in the expat world, you have 3 years. So basically, within 3 years, you either made that company very successful or you haven't. If you made it successful, they sent you something bigger and better. If you haven't, they fire you. It's pretty simple, right? So 2 to 3 years is what you have it. And if it's not working, you're out. If it is working, you're still out, just on something bigger and better. So that's no different than as a consultant. I work into an organization today. It's different in the sense that, as a consultant, I don't have a direct responsibility of telling people what to do, but the challenge is the same: to assess the situation, what's going on, why is it not working, and then making recommendations on how to fix that, and hopefully have an ally in that local team and in that local leadership to make those changes, which you believe will move that peanut forward, right? So it's a very similar thing again. And at the expense of repeating myself, because I'm repeating myself in any situation, whether it's a room or turning a company around or making an acquisition, I'll walk in a room and the first thing I do is listen, observe. What the hell is going on, right? And then kind of just take it all in. And also what helps me is just the experience that I had from all these situations to say, oh yeah, I recognize this, this happened 2 or 3 times, stops ago, and this is what I did. Right. So it just helps shut up, open your ears, open your eyes, observe what the heck is going on before you make any decisions, before you make any recommendations. And that's pretty much what we do with a company that hires us to do a culture assessment. So we do an assessment portion of it, where we talk to a lot of people. Some of it is just assessment by, okay, take this online, questionnaire. Part of it is qualitative, where we sit down and talk to individuals, maybe not every person, but, we'll ask the company to give us maybe 15, 20 people to talk to, so we'd have qualitative assessment. So we listen and say, okay, what's going on inside your organization, right? And it's a little signs also, like you want an organization, I can tell you just by looking around, looking at people's faces, I can say, holy shit, we're in trouble. You got a bunch of really isolated individuals that are not talking to each other with a bunch of puss faces, right? Versus you walk into another organization, you go, wow, that's, maybe it's not as tough as we think it is, because there's a lot of people smiling, there's a lot of people interacting. So something must be going right. Right. So just as a sidebar, when I got my first job, and the reason I joined Colgate-Palmolive as a shift supervisor, on a production floor when I graduated college, was this one a reason. At those times, there was no websites, there was no internet, there was none of that. So it was customary for companies, when they were recruiting you, to bring you to the company and give you what I call the nickel tour. Right. So they would bring you to the company, they walk you through the company, this is our cafeteria, this is our, engineering room, this is our production floors, whatever. And I was always an extroverted guy. I like talking. So while doing these tours, I would always kind of sneak off and have a mini conversation with some of the employees. Hey, what's it like working here? And I can tell you, like, I once named the company, but it was in the defense industry, where I walked over, because I graduated as an undergrad engineer. So my first jobs were, engineering interviews. The guy said to me, this place sucks. You don't want to work here. So, I mean, just talk to people and say, what's it like working here? And then, when I did that same thing at Colgate, I talked to probably about half dozen people, and every person just said, this place is great. It's like, just people love the vibe. In fact, my interview was with this guy, Dave Benz. I'll never forget. I ended up getting to know him much better, but my on-campus college interview was Dave Benz, and Dave Benz starts out with the interview, says, Tom, now let's not talk about your grades, because you either were smart enough to get your GPA, or you were smart enough to cheat you through in college to get GPA. So put that aside. Who are you as an individual? What makes you tick? What do you like doing? That was the interview. And it was such a breath of fresh air, because just, the approach was like, okay, you want to get to know me? And I was ready to, okay, well, I got this grade and this grade, because that's what you have in college. And I was the captain of my tennis team, and all this stuff. So geared up for the interview, and I was like, you're either smart enough to cheat your way through it or got a good grade. So just, tell us who we're getting, who is an individual. And I think, that's extremely important, in your all walks of life. So, going in there just to kind of recap, as I went off in a little rabbit hole, whether I'm consulting or whether I was an expat, going back to my values, listening and understanding. Anytime I'm in a situation, okay, why am I here? What's going on? Let me gather facts first before I see the big picture. And once I see the big picture, then I can make some recommendations.
Yeah. And obviously leadership workshops and culture developments as the center of what you're doing. But it seems to me we're touching on very, very important and relevant themes from the conversation we're having this far. When you're thinking about the workshop methodology you have, because that's something that was quite interesting from my research, was you have truly your own methodology. It's obviously, I'm sure it's inspired by the fact that you're in John Maxwell and so on, but it's quite unique in its fashion that it's unfolding.
What I found in the world is
when you're thinking about the ability of those workshops, obviously to drive meaningful change. And what would you say if anything new from basically what you were talking about, from listening, value space, and that kind of the exchange of stimulus integrations? Why have you found workshop to be the most effective ways of communicating basically these diverse teams for the optimal results?
And figure out what the problem is. Now, once I understand the problem and the big picture, then and 99% of the time I can say, yeah, this workshop will work, or this exercise will work, or because the problems are not unique. The problems are kind of general because they're human problems, and as human beings, we have have the same issues. So that the workshop just becomes a solution, and I just go in my bag of workshops, whether that's one of the John Maxwell workshops or some other workshop, and just say, okay, well, this will probably fit this particular problem, to get these people to open up, to listen to better, to work with better. So, if you go into a situation and say, look, people are just not taking responsibility for their actions, right? So trust is breaking down because there's no accountability inside the organization. So then we say, okay, well, we got to do an accountability workshop, right? If you go inside and you basically say, look, I looked at the big problem and it's like that example where I said, well, they all think alike. Well, now it's not a workshop that's the solution. Now what the solution is we have to restructure that team, maybe maybe move some people from one part of the organization to the other, vice versa, to get that, diversity of mind, of thinking in that side of the team, right? And then you do a workshop to basically say, okay, now how do we learn to get along with each other because we're thinking very differently? And that's actually good, not something bad. That, that shouldn't raise animosity. That should raise collaboration. So you kind of just sit back, look at what the heck is going on, understand it, look at the big picture, and then look into your bag of goods and say, okay, what would work for this particular situation?
Interesting. So more, you're at a point now where you've been analyzing these so much. You're more of you take a decision based on a very, very personalized basis. Seem like you shy away from the cookie cutter type of approach. I want to talk to you about something quite new and something very exciting, Tom, which is you wanting to integrate AI, obviously, in leaderships.
Well, I heard
cultures.
somebody saying
thinking about the AI tools, not only that you're using, but also how to leverage it to enhance basically leaderships and build more robust, basically, company cultures. Tell me more about we all with AI doing that. Are they already good enough, basically, to be able to not only support but replace some of the leadership roles? Tell me more about the relationship with it as was in our daily work days.
So think about I'll start working with a company. So again, the first thing we do is the assessment phase, and we come up with a big picture, and then come up with the implementation phase, which may be a workshop. Now, what happens with a workshop? Well, a workshop is probably about 90 minutes. Maybe it's a half a day. You can't get people's attention. Well, you can't do one workshop for 2 days. So you do a workshop for maybe 90 minutes, at most 4 hours for a really complicated workshop, because people's attention span just drops off, right? And then that's a picture in time. Now it's gone, right? So now, how is that workshop working in people's lives? Are they actually doing what they learned in the workshop? Well, I'd love to be a fly on the wall on the next meeting to see what's going on in the next meeting. How are people behaving, right? So with the technology we have today, we can have this fly on the wall to sit in a Zoom meeting, to sit in a team meetings, to sit in a Google Meet meetings, where it actually listens to what you say. And a lot of tools do that, like Otter AI and all these stuff, kind of transcribe all the things you say. But no, don't even listen to my say, but also map out what I say versus those objectives that we're trying to say, that we're trying to achieve. Give you feedback, and it's not a spy, because it's not a fly on the wall that reports to the leadership of the company and says, okay, now we got something on you. So, it's a leverage against you, but it's real time feedback for you. In fact, we're working on a module that basically says during the meeting, while you're talking and you say something stupid, you'll get a text on your phone to say, hey, heads up. That was, maybe you want to apologize for what you just said, right? Or hey, attaboy, that was a great thing. You want to reinforce what you say. So it becomes very interactive and helps you, the individual, to say, okay, I got some blind spots. I said something stupid. I said something that doesn't trust you, right? It violates our trust that we have. So it's a fly on the wall that says, in between those workshops, in between those executive coaching sessions, how are you implementing that? Are you making progress? And look, it's not overnight. So you had a benchmark, let's say you were a 6.8 when you started. We're a month into this. Great. You're at 7.2. You're still not a 10, but you went from 6.8 to 7.2 instead of going down to a 5, right? So, augmented intelligence is just another tool to use in our, tool bag.
Right.
Yeah. So it's, I actually,
got it. So that the tool that you're working on right now, from my understanding, it's kind of like a meeting recorder or something that basically was able to be at a meeting or at a conversation or whatever, basically where that took place, is really able to scan the rooms and then intelligently basically make some feedback towards not only what was talked about, but how people reacted. I'm sure the length of conversation as well.
Right now,
talking is recorded and so on. Is that the idea with that specific tool you're talking about?
In meetings like you and I, if I had it in here, it would analyze what I would say and analyze what you would say, and it would give us some benchmarks and some feedback. It's good because of technology. It knows that I'm speaking and it knows that you're speaking. It can look at not just what I said, but it also looks at how I said it. So if I said something humorous and everybody was laughing, hey, that was good. If I started laughing when I was talking about my grandmother's funeral, it kind of would give me a feedback to say, maybe that's not a laughing matter. Right. So, and then we're working on, version 2.0, which will actually take some facial cues, while we're sitting on this. So like if you're rolling your eyes, it's going to say, well, okay, was that authentic? Or if I'm looking down, that means I'm probably looking at my phone and distracted and doing something else, then they're listening to you. So some facial cues, how we say it, what we say, so give you some live feedback, but it's
maybe that's a little bit awkward. Yeah.
It's evolving. I mean, 5 years ago, you couldn't do this, right?
Yes, absolutely. No, and technology is, it's at an expensive pace, and it's not only not going anywhere, but it would evolve regardless of if you'd like it or not, to evolve. So better use it as a tool, as you call it. I think that's the right way to look at it. It's an amplifier, right? Great work done with technology will be better work, and bad work done with technology will be not. That will still be bad work. And I think that's something to always keep in mind. I want to very, very quickly touch upon a term that you use a lot, which I think kind of like summarizes very well this conversation and maybe can put a little bit of the meat around the bone. You identify basically what we call culture catalysts, and you talk about this quite often, obviously focusing on creating basically healthy cultures and aligning them with organization goals. When you're thinking about what I call those typically buzzwords or branding, right? Big culture catalysts. Was that something that basically was from you as a point of entry as a way to, I suppose, segments or title some type of individuals or opportunities, or what would you say? How would you say are you able to utilize culture catalysts inside an organization that you're just getting into? You're just getting hired, basically. For example, let's take banking industries. You're trying to analyze who is or what can be a culture catalyst for them. How do you operate within your framework to find it, implement it, and do so in a successful fashion? Sure. Can you hear me now? Okay, great. I was saying that you talked at length about culture catalysts, right? On the fact that the importance of not only identifying them, but also making sure they align with your other relationships. When you're thinking about the new contracts you're getting higher. I was giving a plain basically example. What's typically how does it fit within your methodology to either identify the culture catalyst that might already be there and amplify it, or then in the case in which it's not there, you would like to basically make sure that you have one on them so that basically your methodology can work smoothly. How do you make that distinctions, and how does that come into tangible actions?
And we believe that we have two issues. One is that people are not accountable, and two is we don't think people are communicating. Right? So that was a specific brief from our company. They didn't ask us what our problem was. They didn't ask us come in and do an assessment. They didn't ask us, we don't know. They said, our culture is based on ESOP and people are not accountable. So come fix it. That was a specific brief, right? We had another company that came to us, a very large company, and said, look, we spent $2.5 million with Deloitte and Touche to tell us what our culture should be. So the last thing we want to do is spend another $2.5 million telling us what our culture should be. So we're pretty happy, but it's not working a lot. We're a very, very large organization. It's working in some places. It's not in other places, right? So again, that particular client with a culture problem came to us and said, tell us why it's working some places and tell us why it's not working other places, and how do we fix it? Right? So that was a very different break, right? Well, versus a third company that was actually part of a very large company, and they basically came to us and said, look, we've got very clear culture from the large organization, but people in this organization haven't bought into it, right? The big, they own us, and we got all these posters and, stuff on the wall, but people are not actually walking the talk. They haven't bought into it. They think it's a bunch of bullshit, right? So again, a very different brief. So on that one, it's more of okay, well, we're not going to throw out the mother company's culture because obviously that's very important. But how do we take that culture and make it your culture? So in that sense, it's okay. Let's build a culture for this subsidiary of this, doesn't buck that big culture, but it's not exactly that. It's something a little bit different that you guys can own, and it's your culture. And how do we implement that? So again, just 3 quick examples of working with companies. So I don't kind of specify what their problem is. They'll come to me and say, okay, this is our problem. Can you help? Yeah. Every once in a while, you cut out for like 10 seconds or 15 seconds. I don't know what it is. Okay.
Interesting. Love it. So the clients are informing to what basically they're not only thinking, but they want help with, and therefore you're positioning the solution of it basically from your perspective through theirs, which obviously makes sense. Love this very flexible basically model. And Tom, Julian, just kind of like to conclude, obviously you spend now decades in diverse roles and obviously in leaderships yourself. And so I was thinking, can you hear me now? Yeah,
well, I told you that
it's definitely coming from your side, but I can hear my sound maybe very, very clear. We'll edit that basically from our side, but just wish to send you one last question, perhaps. But Tom, one always interesting, obviously, as you spend decades in obviously leadership roles and in building diverse organizations, and you still do. I was wondering, you write a book as well on it. So you have different platforms how the world is becoming better leadership-wise. But what do you want your legacy to be? If you had to put in words and just put yourself in a point where you're not working anymore or whatever basically happens, what would you like your legacy to be and people to remember you as?
Then what are you doing?
Beautiful. Fantastic. So nothing as a business legacy, perhaps.
Every time on a podcast, they ask me this question, and I have the same answer. So if you heard me on a different podcast, this is not new to you. I'm
Absolutely.
sorry.
I love it. Well,
but and I didn't have the answers to these three questions until later on in life. So I don't care if you're 18, 20, 30 or 70.
What are you doing? No, you're absolutely right. So if you perhaps valuing personal achievement over professional ones, Mr. Tom Kereszti was just such a pleasure to be able to get some of your best insights and some of your best stories as well as part of this podcast. I really appreciate you joining us today. And I would love if we can share some last words of wisdom with our audience.
It took me a while to figure it out. I was not a servant leader when I was in my 20s and 30s. I was a self-centered, egotistical son of a bitch. It got to me to some certain places, but then, later on in life, the light went on and said, this is not the way to go. So it's about, and look, it makes sense. When I was a CEO, I had the easiest job in the room. My job was simply to pick the right people and to create an environment where they could be successful. So I just had to serve them. And then the second question that you got to clarity in is what are you passionate about? Because it's if I'm not passionate about it, how the hell do you want me? Why are you going to be passionate about it? I was like, oh man, Tom looks like he's falling asleep. I mean, that doesn't really light him on fire. I guess I'm not interested in either. So I don't know what you're passionate about, but find that passion, and then live it and have it oozing through your skin. And so people see that you're on passion and you're fire for something, and then they'll get on fire about it. And what I'm passionate about is making people better, making companies better, making products better. I'd love to make the world much better, but I'm just not that big of a fish to make the world much better. So I just do it, one little step at a time. And then the third question is, what are you good at? Right. And, nobody likes to follow incompetence. So find out what you're good at. And please ask people what you're actually good at may not be the same thing. Right. So do some soul searching and say, what are you really good at? And so I'm really good at mentoring and leading. Right. That's what I found out through all my years. So I'm a servant leader. I'm passionate about making people better, making companies better, making products better. I'm pretty good at mentoring and leading. Now, why does that work in my life? The reason that works in my life is because I can take that formula anywhere and apply it, right? I've heard people say, well, you have to be one way at work and one way it's like, that's schizophrenic, right? Why would you wear different hats depending on where you are in life? So look, I said, I want my legacy to be my kids. So, I can mentor my kids. I can lead my kids, right? I can add value and make my kids better, right? I can be a servant leader to my kids. That formula works in my family life. That formula also works in my work life, right? I can be a leader of my organization. I can be mentoring my employees. I can be passionate about adding value and making my customers better, making my product better. And I can serve my products. I can serve my customers. I can serve my employees. I can serve my company. So that formula works in my work life. I could be, playing, enjoying tennis with my friends, right? That formula works in that part of my life also. So I don't have to reinvent myself every time I'm in a different place. It works consistently. So if there's any words of wisdom that I dropped in this podcast, I would say that's the most important one.
Thank you for spending your time with us today on the Meaningful Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review or share it with someone who could benefit from it. And always remember, your story matters. Make it meaningful. We hope to see you next time.